Meet Channel 7 Eyewitness News anchor and reporter Joe Torres, next on a special edition of Carpe Diem. Hello and welcome to Carpe Diem. I'm Marc Rosenweig, Associate Professor in the School of Communication and Media at Montclair State University. Our guest is Joe Torres, anchor and reporter at WABC-TV News in New York. He's an award-winning journalist who's also the host of Tiempo, weekly program tackling issues of importance to the Hispanic community. He provided extensive coverage of the travels of the late John Paul II and the 9/11 tragedy. Prior to joining Channel 7 Eyewitness News 17 years ago, Joe was a reporter at stations in Philadelphia, Scranton, and Savannah. He's also a native New Yorker, and he's here today to receive the Dumont Broadcaster of the Year Award from our school and to speak with students. And Joe, welcome to campus.
A pleasure to be here once again.
And congratulations.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a big honor.
And I want to start out by telling everybody that you were born in Brooklyn.
Yes, I was.
Then in the 6th grade, you moved to northern Westchester.
Northern Westchester County,
me.
that's right.
And then how did you get into broadcast news? How did that happen?
It's funny because to this day, a lot of my relatives and even my mom and dad know that at a pretty young age, 10th grade, I knew that I wanted to be, back then it was called radio and television communications, if you remember.
Yes, I do.
I'm sure you do. And that's what I wanted to do. I was always a pretty good writer. I never had trouble with public speaking, and those two work well for what I do today. So the more we looked at it, the more I realized, okay, maybe telling stories in front of a camera might be good for me. And I had that kind of focus that said that's where I want to go, and thankfully everything worked out well.
Did you, as a kid, did you watch TV news and say, I want to be so-and-so?
I did. I can't say that I watched either the big three, Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, Peter Jennings, and said, ultimately, that's what I want to do. I did enjoy watching the news. Yes, I was a news junkie. Mm-hmm. But certainly the three of them, as well as the local broadcasters here in New York on ABC, NBC, and CBS, were channels that I watched and said, yeah, that would be great. Doing that would be fabulous.
Now you go to college at SUNY, right?
Yeah, SUNY Brockport,
right.
Yeah, Western New York.
And how did you develop there? Was there a professor who was a mentor? How did that advance your program?
It's funny you mentioned that because just yesterday, a student at my alma mater reached out to me via Twitter and said, Ginny, Virginia Bachelor, who was one of my professors, is still there, and I won't tell you how many years ago that was, and she sends her regards. And she, yes, was a big professor, had a big influence on me, taught me a great deal about particularly writing for television news, and I still use lots of the tips and techniques that she gave me to this day. So they had a great, like they do here at Montclair, a fantastic studio and broadcasting program for either, back then it was electronic journalism or print journalism. I obviously was electronic journalism, and it really helped put me on the path to where I am today. You know, I point out it's a SUNY school, it's a small school within the SUNY system in Western New York, but I'm alongside many students and my colleagues who went to big schools like Northwestern and Syracuse and Michigan and Temple. And I like the fact that I went to a small school in Western New York, SUNY system, and I'm alongside them. It says a lot for the program there.
No, absolutely. So then you joined the NBC Page program, but then your first reporting stint is in Savannah, Georgia. How did that come about, and what was that experience?
I did my NBC Page for just about 2 years. Mm-hmm. I think to this day, one of the best jobs I've ever had. Really? So much fun. But the unique opportunity of being an NBC Page is that you're in the network, and therefore you can, quote unquote, network. Shake hands with people in the aspects of the business that you may want to pursue. So my wife, who was an NBC Page with me, and that's where we met, she liked press and publicity. So she went in that direction. I like to do news. And the long and short of it was I went to the affiliate relations director one day and said to him, listen, my name's Joe Torres. I'm interested in becoming a television news reporter. And I know that New York is not where I start. New York is where I end up. And he heard that and said, well, you're ahead of the game already. Where would you like to focus your attention? And after coming out of Brockport, where it was winter until May, I said, let's focus on the Southeast somewhere. And he made a few phone calls to general managers at NBC stations, and I took it upon myself to visit the ABC and the CBS stations in markets such as Savannah, Charleston, Macon, Panama City. I literally got in my car and drove.
So you knocked on doors.
Knocked on doors.
Yeah.
Knocked on doors. And the first boss who said, all right, we have a spot for you. And that's the one. Savannah was the one. In fact, he told me, Mark, that I had a spot for you as a cameraman, not as a reporter. And I told him, all right, I'll be willing to shoot for you as long as you realize and understand that at some point I want to be in front of the camera, not behind the camera. And that happened within 9 months after I was hired.
So what was that experience like working in that type of market, and how did it help you progress?
They say you make your mistakes in the smaller markets, and I made certainly plenty of mistakes in Savannah. Once I became a reporter there, I was a general assignment reporter. I worked nights and weekends. And it really does hone your skill in the sense that you're covering small town meetings, you know, planning board, school board, zoning board, senior center things, and you're sent out to cover whatever the news is out of that particular event, but make it interesting for the viewer. And you learn very quickly that if I open up my story with a shot of the planning board, you can almost hear the channels changing.
Right.
You really had to go out, listen to what they talked about in the meeting, and flush out the story, you know, at the housing project or down the street or along the business community, to get the video there, to tell the story and work your way back. So for me, it was a tremendous learning experience. It was almost like grad school going to Savannah. And what was great about Savannah is, yes, it's a smaller market. I think it's market 102 or right around 100, but it's not so small that you can get lost. It has culture, it has the beach, it has, you know, its own airport. There's quite a bit going on within that community.
But still, you made the sacrifice to leave home and hearth, so to speak,
Yes.
to get this experience
Yeah.
and build your career, and then you go to Scranton
Yep.
from there.
One final story before
Yeah,
I get
sure,
to Scranton.
sure.
In Savannah, I was looked more, you know, here I am, a New Yorker, Puerto Rican, suddenly thrust into the deep South. And
How did that turn out? How was the cuisine?
They looked at me not so much as a Latino, but as a Yankee.
Well, that says a lot too,
It does.
right?
They said, who's this Yankee coming from New York to try and make inroads here? But I still have friends to this day who are still in Savannah, who I still talk to. That's where they grew up, and that's their home, the way New York is my home, and they're making a living there.
That's great, and I think by progressing then to Scranton and Philadelphia, you were able to build on your expertise, right? By gradually moving up.
Yes, you want to move perhaps from a smaller market to a medium-sized market to get wider exposure, probably a little bit more pay. The money that you make in a small market like Savannah is very, very little. But at that point, you're young, you're excited, you want to do the job because you love the job, and I still do. But an opportunity came in Scranton. It was at the ABC station there in Scranton.
And they have a good reputation.
Very good
Yeah,
reputation. To this day, it's WNEP-TV in Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, an ABC station. And when I was hired there, Mark, it was owned by the New York Times. So the New York Times, at that point, threw money into the station, had all the bells and whistles that you'd find at a bigger market. Helicopter, satellite truck, numerous microwave trucks, all the high-tech, at that point, camera gear and recording equipment. And I fell into this station with a really good reputation, and it thrust up my, my image, if you will, throughout the entire northeastern corner of Pennsylvania. It covers a really wide market, that station. The Scranton-Wilkes-Barre market goes from, if you know your geography of Pennsylvania, all the way from Stroudsburg and the Poconos to the center of Pennsylvania, State College, where Penn State is located. Right. You know, that is, I think it's 21, 22 counties out of the 63 that are in Pennsylvania. So it's a third of the state.
A lot of time in the car.
A lot of time in the car, yeah. There were many
yeah.
stories. You know, they would hand it to you in the morning, and you'd look at it and say, I'm going to where? Where's that? And they'd say, oh, that's 2 hours away. You know, that's a ride.
Speaking of stories, let's talk about
Sure.
some of the big stories
Yeah.
you've covered. And one of the things that you have done a lot with over the last couple of decades has to do with the papacy, the coverage of the late John Paul II, the election of his successor. And
Pope Benedict.
if for those who go to your Facebook page, they'll see you with Cardinal Dolan,
Cardinal Dolan.
on the homepage there. What's the significance for you of that coverage?
For me, the beauty of covering those stories is they have a great deal of depth. You know, each and every day we can get thrown out to a story that is difficult, tragic, terrible, whether it's a shooting in Newark or a fire in the Bronx or some other tragedy in another location. And finally, you get a story that has meaning to so many, not just thousands, millions of people. The election of a spiritual leader for so many. So for me, it was an opportunity to sort of sink my teeth into a story that had some teeth to it, in the sense that it had deeper meaning for so many people. And that's why once I started doing them, I put my hand up again, can I go once more? And each time you do a trip like that, Mark, you get a little better acquainted with the wheels and cogs of how the operation works. And you're more experienced for the next one based on your experience from the last one. So for the good folks at my station, the managers and the decision makers, it became, all right, we'll just send Joe, because he knows how it works, he knows who to talk to, he knows how to find the people. In Rome, you know, remember Rome is such a big city, just like New York. And the difference between doing the stories for Channel 7 and doing the stories for ABC Network is that we always try to localize it. Right. We wanted to, you know, how does it affect the Catholics and the viewers back in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut?
And of course, you're dealing with a subject in the church that has many social issues.
Correct.
Everything from the LGBT community to,
yes.
you know, the abuse of
sexual
parishioners
abuse
and so
of
on.
minors,
Right.
The role of the church, abortion, contraception, so many issues, yes, that the church is involved with and has a say in the lives of people. So often before a trip, we would sort of line up, you know, what are the topics we're going to try and hit, that we're going to try and discuss. And with the election of a new pope, there's always questions, will the church go in this direction or will it go in that direction? And those are always, you were rich with topics and rich with story ideas before you even got on the plane to go to Italy. So yeah, a tremendous amount of work, but as you mentioned, for me, very rewarding work because it's lasting. And so.
Now the other thing that is lasting, because it stays with a lot of reporters, your colleague N.J. Burkett was here a few years ago, is 9/11 coverage.
Yes.
And how difficult is that for a reporter to cover a tragedy? First there's the initial coverage, but it lingers and is a part of everybody's life for the rest of their lives.
The rest of their lives.
Yeah.
For me, when people ask me about my stories, there's 9/11 and then there's everything else. So 9/11 gets its own category because it was such a unique day for all the wrong reasons, and a challenging day and a difficult day, and one that continues to this day. It's not something that I enjoy talking about. I will certainly with you, because the memories are so terrible, the memories are so tragic, the lives impacted are thousands. And look at us today. You know, our lives have been changed when we go to the airport, when we do security, when we go to a courthouse, a direct result of the events of 9/11. So the impact of that has been tremendous. The challenge covering it, yes, you're much more involved in that story because you're there. You could easily have been a victim just as much as 3,000 other people were, and thousands more. So it has a real big impact on you. The big challenge, I couldn't get a hold of my wife that day. You know, she hadn't heard from me. My folks hadn't heard from me. So there was a lot of question as to whether I was okay. That's the challenge looking back on it now, is that period of, from a personal level now, that period of uncertainty where my wife didn't know if her husband was going to survive. And then trying to tell the stories is, when I do difficult stories, Mark, I really try to keep in mind that the person who is no longer with us has no voice. And I've been, for lack of a better word, blessed with the opportunity to tell their final story. And that means a great deal to me. And I really try and do my best in the 90 seconds that I have to tell their story, because this is the end, this is it. So I really do want to lift them up and present them to the world in such a way that here's why we're doing this story on this person, because of what they contributed, because of who they were and what they did, and we should honor them and remember them. Mm-hmm. So it's a big responsibility, but I do accept it.
As far as your work with Tiempo for the Hispanic community and you know, seen by others in the community as well, what are you accomplishing there, and what are some of the key issues? Because we have immigration now, we have racism with the situation in Ferguson and Staten Island, and how do you deal with these issues on the show? How do you communicate with that community?
I've got two rules for Tiempo when people come on. Number one, I don't want Tiempo to be a platform for you to come on to yell and scream and to just moan and complain about what's wrong with life, the system, etc. I say that because if you come on, you can certainly lay the foundation of why you're here and what the problem is, but offer solutions. My hope is that the viewers at home, whether they are Latino or not, can watch Tiempo and at the end of the broadcast say, I learned something today that I didn't know before. If we can do that, then we've succeeded. We've informed and we've educated, which to me is a great responsibility as a television news journalist. What I love about Tiempo is that it provides me a longer format to dig deeper into a topic. As I just mentioned to you, typically my reports on Eyewitness News are 90 seconds long. That's it. And if you think that's easy, I would argue that it makes it harder to tell a story because
no question.
You have such little time. On Tiempo, now I've got 22 minutes minus the 8 minutes of commercials to tell a story. And I can let it breathe, and I can dig deeper, and I can ask the questions that perhaps I couldn't tell in the news story. And that's one of the great blessings of Tiempo, and I really enjoy that. Issue-oriented, as you mentioned, that was part of your question. On Tiempo, we certainly look at what's topical to Latinos. Mm-hmm. So what is happening in the world today, or in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut metropolitan area that affects Latinos? And that's topic number one. And then the second half of the show will perhaps do something a little lighter, whether it's a film festival or a story about education, which is a big topic. Immigration will certainly.
Well, that's a very difficult one to tackle, the immigration issue.
It is.
There are so many aspects to it.
And it's what we often do is, if it's a big topic such as immigration, we'll dedicate the whole show to immigration. And rather than doing 2 topics or 3 topics, we'll focus the entire show on immigration, the President's plan, which was the most recent one that we did, the President's executive action, the pros, the cons, what works, who gets left out, those sorts of things. And we really can open some eyes in a half-hour show.
Now, how important is the use of social media to your reporting and what you do now and to journalism in general?
It's important, and it's growing in importance. I think you can definitely see the difference between some of the new reporters and some of the older reporters, and their use and their reliance on social media. Regretfully, I'm on one of the older reporters now. So the challenge has been a little bit difficult for some of the older reporters because it hasn't been part of our lives. Whereas some of the younger reporters, they've grown up with Twitter and MySpace and Facebook and other social media outlets that have come and gone. And for them, checking the Facebook page or checking their Twitter account is second nature. Whereas for me, I'm still at the point, oh, I got to remember to check. Because my argument, and it's not my argument, my position is I'd rather be making phone calls to get more information or to clarify some information.
Although people, as we know, people go on people's Facebook pages, try to get information. Let's say there's a suspect in a case.
Correct.
And so on. But then that leads to the question of what's real and what isn't that you're looking at, right? And how do you determine that?
So that can make your day longer. Because if you see something on Facebook or on Twitter that would give an indication of which way the story is going, well, now you cannot rely on that solely. you have to vet that information. So it requires an additional phone call, or I'll call my assignment desk, or I'll call, can we track down the source? Who posted that? Can we use the picture that they posted? So, you know, you quickly start spreading yourself really thin because, yeah, you want to talk to the people on the scene. You want to talk to maybe the family of the suspect. Obviously, you want to get all the video that you can to tell your story. And now you've got to check social media as well. And now they want us certainly to post as well.
Right.
So that we can alert our viewers that we're on top of it, that we're here. That if you have information, you can almost use social media to say, I'm at the corner of, you know, Avenue A and 5th Street. Come to me here if you've got information that you think I could use. So it has its pros and cons, but it's definitely an important part.
Well, and along those lines, how big are your concerns that there's too much of a rush to be first today rather than being right for some people?
I think that's always a concern, especially with social media. It's amazing in the last 5 years to watch how quickly information moves. And, you know, we'll hear something in the newsroom on the scanner, and, you know, we're on the way to the scene, and people are at the scene posting and tweeting about it. Whereas years ago, we'd hear something on the scanner, we'd get to the location, we'd be among the first ones there, and we'd see, no, it wasn't as much as it was made out to be, and we would turn and focus in another direction. Now, information spreads rapid fire. And it'll be interesting, you know, I think it'll be interesting for police to learn how to respond, because people are finding out what's happening almost as quickly as the police are. You know, as quick as the 911 call comes in, because there's information to be gathered and passed out at the scene by people who are there with their smartphone, and it seems everyone has a smartphone.
And, you know, you see stories like the Bill Cosby story, which are fueled by a lot of the social media. And, you know, maybe 20 years ago there wasn't attention paid to a lot of this. Ray Rice and TMZ.com video.
Sure.
We have all these outlets now.
Yes, and I think the caution, Mark, is that people need to be able to decipher what they call media. And I think someone who has created a blog yesterday because they were angry over the decision of a Supreme Court or the lack of an indictment doesn't mean that they're media right away. And if you rely on them as gospel information, you need to be careful. And then you're right, and then it spreads, and it becomes viral very quickly. And what might not be true is often perceived as being true. And that makes things very challenging, very challenging.
Well, that brings us to the next question as to where we're going to be, particularly with local TV news, say 5 years from now.
Yep.
What's your outlook on that?
You know, this circular table provides a good way to point out the story. What's been happening is, if this table, this big circle, represents the pie of the viewing audience, what I think has been happening is the pie doesn't get any bigger, but people taking slices out of the pie, us, the TV stations, are more numerous. So just the way you had the pie at the Thanksgiving table, if it's one pie for 30 people, then the piece that you're going to get is pretty small. When we were, many years ago, first starting, and it was ABC, CBS, Channel 5, Channel 11, Channel 9, well, there's only 7 people taking a slice out of the pie. You had a pretty big chunk. Well, that pie is the audience, and our slice is getting thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner and smaller and smaller and smaller. So do I see local television news going the way of cassette tapes and 8-track recorders? I don't think so. I don't think it'll disappear entirely. But I think perhaps the number of us might be fewer in years down the road. I have no doubt that Channel 7 will be one of the ones that remains.
Most watched station in the nation,
yes,
right? You like
you
to
know,
say that?
we're doing something right, but we're always looking over our shoulders. You know, we like competition because it keeps us on our toes. But yes, I would think network news is almost a little bit more challenged than local news, because network is covering all of the country. Whereas local news, to this day, people will walk up to us and say, "I've been watching Channel 7 my entire life. My mom and dad watched." People will talk about the anchors that we've had years ago. One of them that's on the trophy, Roz Abrams or Bill Butel or Roger Grimsby. Those names still come up out on the street. So I don't think Channel 7 will be going anywhere anytime soon. Thank the good
Yeah,
Lord.
and there are a lot of those who say that television is not going to go away. It's just going to be, as you said, that pie is going to be distributed
Yeah.
in different forms, so
Correct.
you can go to different streams, different apps, et cetera, to
Yeah.
get all that information.
And it's amazing how multi-screened people are now, that it's almost become more the rule than the exception, that when you watch television, you also have another screen somewhere, whether it's your iPad or your smartphone. So many of the shows today will cater to that, so that, oh, tweet us, Dancing with the Stars, you know, who do you think was the winner? So people are obviously on their phone and they're watching at the same time. So the challenge for us as a television station is how to reach those people on both screens at the
Right.
same time. And that requires some creative thinking.
As far as being creative,
Sure.
with your family,
Yeah.
over the years, how have you balanced family and profession? Because you have a wife and 2 sons. How do you do that?
It is very, very difficult. I married a wife who I met, as I mentioned earlier, at NBC. So she's familiar with the business. She's therefore familiar with the demands of the business.
So that helps.
Yes,
Yeah.
that helps tremendously. But it's very similar to being married to a firefighter or a police officer or an emergency room surgeon. The hours are not normal. They're different. They're constantly changing. That makes planning difficult, taking a vacation challenging, getting to your son or your daughter's events a little bit more chaotic. But at the same time, if you have a family that understands that that's what the job requires, then they're willing to work with you. Some sons and daughters more so than others. But definitely there comes a time where you need to put your foot down and say to your boss or to your manager or your editor, listen, my son's only going to play in one big soccer game his entire life, and it's this one, and I need to be there. And many of them are parents, and they understand, and they'll try and make it happen.
Are your sons interested in broadcast journalism, or have they heard too many stories at the kitchen table?
They've heard too many stories apparently at the kitchen table. So they are. I've got 2 boys, blessed with 2 boys, one in college, one about to go to college. Neither one wants anything to do with television news or communications. One is studying forensic science, and the other one has an interest in mechanical engineering. So I can't give them much guidance. I can help write their papers a little bit, but
Well, hopefully they'll be loyal audience members.
yes,
How's that?
I hope so too.
Joe, thanks for joining us. Congratulations
Oh,
on the award. It's
the-
terrific
the
to see
pleasure's
you,
mine.
and
Thank
we'll
you.
talk to students later. And thank you for joining us as well. For more information on this or any edition of Carpe Diem, contact us at carpediem@mail.montclair.edu or call 973-655-5158. I'm Marc Rosenweig from all of us at Montclair State University. Thanks for watching Carpe Diem.